Man, this is really weird. I'm getting ready to start the final season of Teen Titans. I'm coming up on the final season of Prime. It's almost like if I actually make videos, I actually progress through the series that I'm reviewing. Anyway, welcome back to Transformers Prime Reviews. This time we're talking about Out of the Past, an episode that I completely forgotten existed. But I'm super glad that I did, because it meant I got to experience it again. And this is a really good one. It's an immediate follow-up to what's going on with Bulkhead in the last episode. He is recovering at the beginning of this episode, working to regain his strength, doing physical therapy stuff. And Miko is clearly trying to cover up the fact that she's still worried about him, and getting aggressive with him, and trying to push him to get better fast, so that she can put this whole situation behind her. And when the others insist that Bulkhead needs to actually rest sometimes in order to heal, surprise, surprise, she gets all huffy and runs outside to cry, and tries to hide the fact that she was crying when RC comes out to speak with her, because she's trying to pretend like this isn't getting to her. She's trying to bottle her emotions up, and RC understands that. She's suffered losses too, and Bulkhead's not lost, but he was almost lost. It's a similar kind of trauma. And he was also dead for at least a little while there, like we established that last time. He did die, just very, very briefly. And so calling upon her experience dealing with similar emotions when she lost Tailgate and then Cliffjumper, RC sits with Miko and helps her to understand the fact that bottling up her emotions isn't the way to go about things. That it's just going to make things harder in the long run. That she has to open up and trust people again. And really, that's the episode. Like, that's basically the episode. There's flashback stuff here. We get a flashback to RC's past, back when she first met Cliffjumper and decided to team up with him in the wake of losing Tailgate, something that she had otherwise refused to do. Not specifically. She had refused to team up with anyone else again up to that point. But all of that is icing on the cake of a couple of really excellent emotional scenes between a pair of main characters. And I am going to talk about that icing in a second, but I want to talk about the cake itself first, to really stretch the metaphor beyond all reason. Because thinking about it, Miko and RC are actually fairly similar people. They're both tough and kind of intense, and they have an attitude, and they're not traditionally feminine despite being feminine people. And sometimes when one or the other of them talks, when they carry on a dialogue with somebody, you can imagine their words coming out of the other's mouth. It's something I don't think about a lot, because these two characters don't interact a lot in the show. But seeing them interact for any length of time like they did here makes me wish that we did see them interact more often. And it creates a stark contrast, because while Bulkhead isn't as talkative as Cliffjumper was, that was his main thing, he was a talkative guy, the dynamic between Miko and Bulkhead is kind of similar to the dynamic between RC and Cliffjumper. Cliffjumper was a bigger guy. He relied more on his physicality, where RC relied on her speed and the fact that she was smaller to get out of situations. Like, the only super obvious difference, like surface level difference between their dynamic, aside from the fact that Miko is probably the chattier one in her relationship with Bulkhead, is that Miko can't really fight alongside Bulkhead, no matter how much she wishes she could. And now Miko, just like RC used to do, is trying to sequester herself away from people and hide her emotions. Like, obviously there are some parallels being built between these two characters, and it's super interesting to see, and I don't recall if we ever get an expansion on this. I hope it gets explored more in the show going forward, but giving us one episode exploring it, and then through that episode giving us something to think about in regards to this dynamic is fine, and totally welcome, I think. It also goes to show, I don't know if this is as true with Raph and Bumblebee, but like, especially in the case of like RC and Bulkhead and Jack and Miko, these characters are well-realized enough characters, even if we don't get to spend a lot of time with them individually. They're well-realized enough characters that regardless of who they had gotten partnered up with, I still think they would have become friends, and we would have gotten some interesting character dynamics out of them regardless. Because now that I'm thinking about it, Bulkhead and Jack kind of remind me of each other too. Bulkhead's a very easygoing guy. Jack's pretty easygoing. Bulkhead is one of those does what needs to be done types. Jack is also one of those does what needs to be done types. They both have, I think, leadership qualities. I would definitely say the Prime version of Bulkhead has leadership qualities. He's a very dynamic and, in a lot of ways, heroic figure. Like, it's not a one-to-one comparison, but there are character traits that carry over, which might be why I find Jack and Miko's interactions with each other so interesting, because in some ways their interactions are sort of like an alt-universe version of the interactions between either of those two humans and their Autobot partners. There's one scene in particular during the cake portion of this episode that I want to talk about in a little more detail too. It's very, very brief. It's more like an exchange of dialogue than a whole scene. It's just a brief exchange of dialogue that I want to talk about in more detail. When RC finds Miko sitting atop the cliff that the base is in, right next to the monument that they had built for Cliffjumper, and sits with her and says that she understands how Miko feels. Miko is in that kind of place right now where she's hurt and she's raw, and she can't possibly imagine that anyone could possibly understand how she's feeling. So she replies back implying that RC doesn't know how she feels, and you could tell that RC is kind of hurt by that, but I really like how she responds. She just reconfirms that she does, of course she does, and looks over at the memorial, and Miko follows her gaze and realizes how much of an asshole she's being. And I just love scenes like this, where you have these two characters who are usually pretty hot-headed, but they understand each other because of that, which in and of itself is a cool detail. But then you have Miko as someone who is being hurtful towards her friends right now. She's treating them badly, realizing how hurtful she's been and that she overstepped, and she apologizes. And it's really cool. I just like scenes like this a lot. I wrote one in my stinking book, for crying out loud. Like, it's really remarkable. These couple of scenes between these two characters on the top of this cliff make up such a small part of this episode, but it's what I'm going to end up talking about more than anything else in this review. It's very good. I loved it a lot. But that's not to say that the flashback stuff isn't interesting. What ends up happening is that RC is captured by Starscream, who's currently leading the Decepticons, and taken to the Nemesis back before the Nemesis was at Earth. And Starscream only captured her anyway because there's an Autobot signal that's been going out throughout the galaxy that he wants the key to decode. Because he's trying to prove himself to be a better leader than Megatron. Never gonna happen, man, but good on you for trying. And it just so happens that Cliffjumper has just been captured as well, because both of them came back to the area around Cybertron at the same time, because both of them caught wind of the fact that Starscream has been delivering Energon to somebody on the planet for some reason. Something that doesn't really make sense. Cybertron has been abandoned for a very long time. And they both independently decided to come and investigate, and were captured, and because they are brought together as captives, they end up teaming up to escape. And probably the coolest aspect of this part of the episode is we do get to spend some time with Cliffjumper finally. He's not played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson anymore at this point. He's a different actor. But straight up, like, the dude probably could have tried a little bit harder to sound like The Rock, but he sounds like The Rock. Again, I don't understand why they couldn't have just cast somebody who wasn't the frickin' Rock to play Cliffjumper, and then not killed him off because he's such an interesting character. Like, I get they needed to for RC's character, but man, I really would have liked to have seen more of this guy. And they discover when Starscream takes them down to the planet to extract the information that he wants from them from their minds, that Shockwave is there. Shockwave being, you know how Soundwave is like this expert at like cracking codes and like hacking and tech infiltration and stuff? Shockwave is like the Soundwave of human experimentation. Except, you know, not really human. Robot experimentation, but the robots are people. He remained behind on Cybertron even after the planet was abandoned, so that he could reverse engineer the space bridge tech that had been lost for millennia, which was originally used by the ancient Cybertronians to connect with their colony worlds, back before the network had to be destroyed to prevent the spread of cosmic rust, which isn't anything that they tell us in this episode. I've just been reading up on a lot of continuity lore. It's no biggie. And, yeah, he's got a working space bridge. He's actually managed to pull it off, to recreate a lost science. And, he's also the one who invented that cortical patch thing that they used way back when to get information out of Megatron's brain, and then later Megatron used it to put his brain back in his body from Bumblebee's body. So they used that thing to extract the information they want from RC's brain, and then decode the message, which turns out to be Optimus calling all remaining Autobots to Earth. Turns out that it's actually because the Decepticons were able to decode this message that they knew to come to Earth in the first place and start the current ongoing conflict. But, fortunately, that means that Shockwave now has a destination to set for his new space bridge. And so after they combine their skills, Cliffjumper serving as a distraction, being one of those smarmy, overconfident Chatterbox-style characters, he's able to provide a distraction for RC to escape. And then they team up and they manage to destroy the space bridge with Shockwave inside, while at the same time using it to reach Earth so that they can join up with Optimus. And it sets the events of the series in motion. And it's really interesting because the specific advice that RC gives Miko in the RC and Miko parts of the episode is all advice that Cliffjumper gave her. Because what's interesting about these two is that RC on the surface, at least at the time, and I guess a little bit nowadays too, but not nearly as much, she seems very much like the loner type. She doesn't like to let her feelings show. She doesn't like to let people get close to her. But that's just because she has such a big heart, and she doesn't want to be hurt anymore. And meanwhile, Cliffjumper comes off as kind of a jerk with a big head. He's always talking about his past accomplishments, but that's really just because he likes to share and connect with people. They're both so much more than they seem at the surface, and once they get past each other's surfaces and really start to dig into who each other are, they get along well. Like before all of this happened, RC didn't want to go to Earth to meet up with Optimus. Their dynamic is just really interesting. They complement each other so well, not just in like their size and their fighting style, but in their personality types too. And I absolutely love the line. Like, rarely have I ever heard a line this raw in anything, let alone a cartoon. But I love the line. RC sums up the entire point of telling the story to Miko, and also concludes the whole story by saying,
"Funny. At first I didn't think I'd ever get used to Cliff's constant chatter. Now, there's nothing louder to me than the silence."
It's so good. It's so good. Like, this show definitely has its peaks and its valleys. Like, there are definitely some arcs that I think are worse than others, and some character choices that I find absolutely dumb. But when this show is good, it's really good. It's just so weird to me, though, that they would bring in such an important character like Shockwave, give him a voice actor and a little bit of personality. Like, he's actually got a decent amount of personality in this episode. Only to kill him off at the end before they could really use him for anything in the present day. Especially when he's like a G1 legacy character. That's so weird. I wonder if they plan to bring that character back later. I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be fun. Like, I guess it's a little bit of a bummer that we don't really get much of the other characters in this one. But, man, tightening the focus of this episode on just a few characters, on just two pairs of characters, basically, because all the various Decepticon characters who were in this one were pretty superfluous. You could have put RC and Cliffjumper in any dangerous situation and still told basically the same story with them, right? So focusing on these two pairs of characters really helped elevate the story quality of this one a lot. And yet they still found time for some pretty solid action and stuff. The kind of pretty solid action that this show is known for. This is still a really good looking episode with some really cool fight scenes. Like, man, these last few episodes have been some of the best that this show has had to offer. I'm a little, like, I don't remember the show well enough to know whether I'm right or wrong here, but I'm kind of worrying that the show has plateaued at this point. and it's all downhill from here. Maybe this is just a really wide plateau, and the whole rest of the show will manage to fit on it too. Keep our fingers crossed, right? All of that said, though, guys, as per usual, I'd like to know, what did you think of this episode of Transformers Prime Out of the Past? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below. And while you're down there, please like the video, share it with anyone else you think might enjoy my content. Subscribe if you haven't. You can check out my social medias. Links to those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.